Good afternoon. Call to order this meeting of our Health, Environment, and Community Engagement Committee. I'm Councilmember Cam Gordon. I'm chair of the committee, and I'm joined today by Councilmember Bender, Johnson, and Connell. Councilmember Fry should be here in a moment, and we also have Councilmember Reich visiting, who's not on the committee. But we have a quorum of committee members present, so we can conduct the business of the committee. We'll go through the agenda, and then we'll take up the issues. There are 6 items on our agenda today. And the first 2 are consent items. The non-consent items include Neighborhood and Community Engagement Commission and Neighborhood Revitalization Program response to a staff direction. And we also have the receiving and filing recommendations from the NRP Policy Board related to that. And we have the Neighborhood and Community Engagement Commission Annual Report. We also have the Minneapolis 2015 Greenhouse Gas Emissions Inventory Update and the Minneapolis Clean Energy Partnership Second Annual Report. All those are discussion items. First 2 items are consent items. One is a contract amendment with Riverview Window for lead remediation services, and the other is passage of a resolution establishing the Northern Metals Consent Decree Advisory Committee. I will move both of those consent items unless anybody wants to pull something out to discuss it. Seeing none, then all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Those motions carry then. Next, we'll move on to item number 3, which is our Neighborhood and Community Engagement Commission and Neighborhood Revitalization Program Board response. This is to a staff direction that we gave in July. I think it was maybe last year, to review and come back with the structure. It was based on the audit that we did of the NRP program and of the department. And we're going to have Ms. Brodeen present the report. Take your time. The staff direction asked to come back and present some recommendations about possibly restructuring the commission and the NRP Policy Board. The theory was maybe they could be merged. Welcome.
Hi, good afternoon, Chair Gordon, committee members. My name is Cheyenne Brodeen, and I am the Internal Services Manager for the Neighborhood and Community Relations Department. And I am before you today, along with members of the Neighborhood and Community Engagement Commission and the NRP Policy Board, to respond to a council directive issued in July of 2016. And this item is a receive and file item. Just some background information. I'll be giving a brief introduction to what the council directive to the department and the bodies were, and then I'll be handing over the presentation to Nick Chikowitz, who is the current chair of the NCEC, and to Marcia Mariani, who is the vice chair of the NRP Policy Board, to share their recommendations from the council directive. So in July of 2016, this body, the Health, Environment, and Community Engagement Committee issued a directive for the Neighborhood and Community Relations Department, along with the NCEC and the NRP Policy Board, to come up with options to merge the functions of the 2 bodies. And this was an outcome of a neighborhood programs audit report presentation at that meeting, at the July 11th TC meeting, where it was one of the concerns of the audit, or outcomes of the audit report, was that having the 2 bodies with similar functions was a little confusing. So I will now hand it over to Nick Chikowitz, who is the chair of the Neighborhood and Community Engagement Commission.
Thank you for letting the NCEC present today. My name is Nick Chikowitz. I'm the current chair of the NCEC. I live in the Bryn Mawr neighborhood. I'm elected commissioner from District 5.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you. I'd first like to thank the chairs from last year, Chair David Zaffron, who served for 6 months, and you're going to hear from last year's chair, Jeff Strand, in the annual report, but I want to thank both of them for their leadership last year. in everything that the NCEC did, but specifically this specific issue. And so I wanted to make sure both of them were recognized for the work they did taking us through this process. As Cheyenne talked about the overall directive that came from this committee, the Neighborhood and Community Engagement Commission met a total of 4 times: November 16th, January 18th, March 15th, June 12th. The 18th and the 12th were joint meetings between the NCEC and the NRP Policy Board. The NRP Policy Board, as Commissioner Mariani will also talk about, met additionally on July 18th. The Commission took the call and the charge from this committee very seriously. As you can see with the amount of meetings that we had, this was an important discussion with multiple ideas and multiple thoughts about how to better serve the council and in turn serve the neighborhoods. The Commission and the Policy Board discussed 3 specific options: keep the structure of the NRP Policy Board, keep the current structure. Option 2, keep the current structure of the NCEC and adjourn on a quarterly basis as the NRP Policy Board, with additional jurisdictional representatives and necessary jurisdictional powers. And option 3, keep the current structure of the Neighborhood and Community Engagement Commission, but add the necessary jurisdictional powers on a full-time basis to the board. Throughout this time, we were working with the NCR staff to determine kind of what were the thoughts of the council members, what were the thoughts of NCR leadership on where this was headed. We had multiple interactions with Chair Gordon on thoughts and ideas about where this was headed, so that we had an idea of this directive is coming because there's issues that need to be addressed, but are we staying within the box? Are we going outside the box? And there was a challenge to go beyond what a lot of us might have originally thought was the best option. So we were asked to be creative, we were asked to be thoughtful, and you'll see if we ended up in those places. We also, in response to the creative think outside the box request, we talked about other aspects of changes that could occur as well. So the NCEC talked about additional board components, including changing the way neighborhoods are represented. Could we add to the NCEC cultural community representation? How do we address changes to the current appointment process? As you know, the NCEC has 8 elected members from 8 districts throughout the city and 8 appointed. Is there a place on the NCEC for professional staff and community interest? I really want to stress the discussions that happened around the neighborhood election process. The NCEC knows that participation has been low in recent years in terms of individuals who want to serve on the NCEC. And so we've been talking about the NCEC election process well before there was ever a directive to talk about it here. So we continued that discussion. Talk about the current term limits and duration of the terms that are currently served, and the process for election of the NRP Policy Board that is currently handled on the NCEC side with individuals wanting to serve and appointed by the NCEC. Is there a better way to do that? We'll get back to some of those recommendations in a moment, but the official recommendation that came out of the multiple meetings that the NCEC had, the joint meetings with the NRP Policy Board, is as follows. The Neighborhood and Community Engagement Commission offers the following recommendation today. Keep the current structure of the Neighborhood and Community Engagement Commission and adjourn on a quarterly basis as the NRP Policy Board with additional jurisdictional representatives and necessary jurisdictional powers. I think that's the most I've said jurisdictional ever in public. So explore the following board components, and I talked a little about those, but I think there's a lot of work that needs to happen. And so the core recommendation is the first recommendation, that we're asking to have the NRP Policy Board be part of the NCEC on a quarterly basis, and we would have it earlier in the day, maybe at 4 o'clock before the NCEC meeting on a quarterly basis. But I don't want to lose the fact that there's a lot more that can be done that needs to be addressed in this committee and also with the commission as well. So we want more discussions and more dialogue with the neighborhoods as well and all the cultural communities that are there about neighborhood representation, appointed representation, the election process. And we also, as the current commission, feel that there may be other structural changes that by this initial kind of recommendation might lead to a broader idea of what the NCEC can become. We also want to develop a community engagement process consistent with the core principles of community engagement to further explore any revisions to the commission. Without dialogue, without community engagement, the NCEC has no authority, no power, and we really can't be a good steward of the wishes of the neighborhoods. So our goal is to continue to do that. And I want to put one plug in as I step into the chair role for this year, that the NCEC is committed to working with neighborhoods, working with individuals to really be an advocate for community change, an advocate for working with this specific committee as well. So we're excited about that, and this is a broader question. There's individuals who are on the commission now who want to dig in and continue to do the work to find kind of what can the NCEC become and what can it be. Are there any questions?
I don't see any questions right now.
Perfect. Thank you so much for
Thank
the
you.
opportunity.
Thank you, Chair Gordon, committee members. I'll now introduce Marcia Mariani to give the recommendation on behalf of the NRP Policy Board.
Hello,
Welcome. Hi.
my name is Marcia Mariani, and I'm from the Cooper neighborhood under the Longfellow Community Council. I'm the vice chair of your NRP Policy Committee, or Policy Board, and we are recommending no action be taken at this time. And there are several reasons for that. First of all, we have a grave concern that this is being presented to you on behalf of residents without their input. They have not been informed of this action. And a great deal needs to be said. I've worked with the city long enough on this commission. I'm a charter member, and I will tell you that this is not new. We have commissioners on our commission today who are believing that this is a brand new idea. But I stand before you with a document dated first few days in January of 2010, and it's the NCEC's work plan timetable. And it states the NRP/NRP Policy Board operates alongside NCR/NCEC. In 2010, in January, this idea came forward. So it's been a long time coming. I've recently been informed that there's a concern. There are members of this council currently who really don't favor the NCEC. And there's a concern that if the council membership changes and that of the mayor position changes, that may increase. And so therefore, to save the NCEC, it might be wise to combine it with the NRP Policy Board because that has legislative restrictions. So that question has been raised by several people in the neighborhood to me, and I'm referring that back to you. I am your messenger. There's also another consideration that we need to deal with, and that's the current legislature. We aren't certain how they're going to respond to any of this, and it might be a good reason for them to make major changes where we don't have the NCEC, the NRP Policy Board, to represent our neighborhoods. I'm talking about geographical neighborhoods now, not neighborhood groups, because we're all residents. We all belong to the same city. But there's a definite difference in organized neighborhood groups listed geographically. That's what we're talking about here, in addition to thinking beyond the big box. And so I want you all to think about just what this merge really will do if we're going to go ahead without neighborhood involvement. And that means at least letting them know that this is part of the big box. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair Gordon, committee members. This concludes our presentation on this item. I will stand for any questions.
I don't see any questions right now. Maybe there'll be some in a minute. I have a staff direction that I'm going to pass out up here, and I'll also read. I think I was probably one of the instigators of considering the merger in response to the audit report. I think at that time the idea was it was that kind of study found it's pretty confusing. People don't understand the difference between the two organizations. There are duplicate meetings. Staff's also having to staff both of the meetings, and they do a lot of the same things. So I would say that I approached it with a hopeful attitude that, well, maybe there's a way we can simplify and streamline the process and strengthen both bodies and still do all the functions that we need to do. I'm taking this recommendation that's come back as an indication that, nope, it doesn't make any sense at this time. Both groups are saying we shouldn't do it, and I recognize that. Because I do have one question, because one of the NCEC made the recommendation of meeting nearly the same time, trying to coordinate a little bit better in terms of that, which might help with staff resources. Did the policy board discuss that at all? And are they okay with that idea?
Chair Gordon, committee members, that was, I think, option 2. So they would have at least been aware of that option.
Councilmember Reich happens to serve on the policy board. Maybe you can, if the committee went ahead indicating they'd like staff to work towards streamlining and coordinating that, do you think that's something the NRP Policy Board would have a problem with?
You know, making mechanical changes that coordinate and function certainly are amenable to that, and it's also a recognition that, as you mentioned, staff resources, the respect for staff resources is great. It also should be noted for those who aren't familiar, there's overlap between the members, and so that actually relieves some burden on their participation as well. So there's a lot of practical reasons to have these functional changes as we explore, or NCEC explores what they're trying to do. And it should also be noted that part of the conversation at the NRP Board is not an unwillingness to look at reform or changes. It was a broader recognition that we are trying to define what community groups mean for in the big picture. And I think part of that is trying to figure out how does this play into the big picture as well. And we might have been a little bit ahead of ourselves in that process. In addition to talking to the communities and hearing issues and concerns and, you know, doing what we do with that information as well. So I think buying some time for the big picture, I think, is appropriate, and that's what's being indicated, and I think your motion supports that, but also says let's keep exploring, let's make it better, and if there's mechanical administrative changes, I don't think anyone's against that.
Okay, I appreciate that. Maybe I'll say what the staff direction says so people can read it. It's basically trying to incorporate kind of the three maybe, and as well as the NRP Policy Board kind of recommendations. So the first is directing the Neighborhood and Community Relations Department to make any necessary changes to streamline the administrative operations of the Neighborhood and Community Engagement Commission and the NRP Policy Board. And that's just streamlining operations. It's not any kind of technical or legal merger. Second one is directing the Neighborhood and Community Relations Department to research and develop options for structural changes to the Neighborhood and Community Engagement Commission to report back the first quarter of 2018. And the report should include options for the following board components: neighborhood representation, appointed representation, process for election of NRP Policy Board and neighborhood representatives, the neighborhood election process and term limits, and other possible structural changes, as well as a community engagement process consistent with the core principles of community engagement to further explore any revisions of the commission. I guess that last phrase maybe isn't needed, but and those the components of the staff direction were taken right out of the staff report that we got. That's before us. Do you have any concerns or questions about that?
Chair Gordon, no, that sounds great.
And it doesn't mean that the community engagement process is done or anything, or that we've settled on any options. We're just going to look at this again the first quarter of next year, and we're going to have an understanding of what community engagement we do and what possible options we have to make some structural changes. Any questions or comments on the staff direction? Councilmember Connell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just wanted to clarify, under number 3, then you're moving a substitute motion here so that instead of voting on 1, 2, and 3, we will be voting on 1 and 2.
Well, yes, we can receive it. We could actually receive it. We'll probably receive and file the recommendations in the full report, but then we're going to move the staff direction. And you're right, the way it's written, 2 and 3 get combined.
Got it. Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, then I'll take a vote. All those in favor, and I'll move receiving and filing the recommendations of the NCEC as well as the NRP Policy Board, and also moving the staff direction that I just read. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. Any abstentions? Those motions carry then. And thank you very much, everybody, for being here. And you might want to stick around because now we're going to move on to our next item,
Yes.
which is the annual report, so we can hear more about the NCEC and what they've worked on. And Ms. Brodeen, you might want to start that too, and I know Mr. Strand is prepared to speak.
Correct. Chair, good afternoon, Chair Gordon, committee members. I am in front of you once again today for the NCEC Annual Report. And this report will be given by the former chair for the June 2016 through July 2017 NCEC yearly cycle. So I will hand it over to Jeff Strand to give the remainder of the report.
Thank you, Mrs. Brodeen, and Chair Gordon, council members. I thank you on behalf of the Neighborhood and Community Engagement Commission for this opportunity. As the immediate past chair of the NCEC for the 2016-17 term, it's a pleasure to walk through this presentation on the annual report that is required, along with Commissioner Marcus Mills, who will be covering a part of the Neighborhoods 2020 presentation. I know that our time is quite limited, so adding to the accumulating body of policy work of the NCEC developed with the community and with the Neighborhood and Community Relations Department. It's a pleasure to go through this report, and if you could page turn, thanks. So here you have the 2016-2017 members. I served as chair of the commission following Commissioner David Zaffran's resignation. Okay. The Community Connections Conference put on by the city and NCR department was an outstanding success. There was record attendance of over 540 residents. There was a 10% increase in participation by communities of color, so that 40% of the attendees were representatives from communities of color of our city. I just want to say, as one who volunteered and helped in a learning lab with City Clerk Casey Jo Carl and Director Rubador, that there was really robust dialogue in those sessions. And I know that I recall very distinctly a young transgender person who was discussing the challenges of serving on city boards. And so this was really a valuable experience for the participants, I believe. The Neighborhoods 2020 is an ongoing process that the NCEC identified way back in January, February of 2015. And so I, as a personal note, I am extremely grateful to council for the opportunity to serve again on the NCEC, having been a founding member, as was Commissioner Mariani, and a member of the Community Engagement Task Force that advised the city on establishing this resident-based advisory commission. So Commissioner Mills will talk about the 5 sector meetings where there were between 500 and 600 residents participating, that the earlier work product delivered by Neighborhoods 2020 was the draft Neighborhood Participation Program guidelines that the council and mayor approved. Next. We had a, as just reported on, At one time, we were told to think outside the box, and I think the NCC did so. Not out of a position of fear of change. And so I understand the council direction on that, but nonetheless, the NCC was responsive to the council staff direction to the department. And so working with the council members and with the NRP Policy Board, as council members may know, that back when the NRP was reconstituted, since I was the first chair, non-elected official, you decided that the NCEC would appoint the elected members of the NRP Policy Board versus where they previously had been directly elected through a electoral system during the period of time when the NRP was the main program here. One Minneapolis fund, the next item, there was $182,000 in grants recommended. Council members probably recall these are very innovative and they are awarded to groups that do not receive the Community Participation Program money. We also had a report that was issued on the outcomes of the One Minneapolis Fund. So again, that body of work that you have NCR and NCC generating in this field of community engagement. Showing the agility and flexibility and responsiveness to concerns raised by community residents. The role of the neighborhood organizations in facilitating engagement was discussed, became a community dialogue, much more than, alleged post-it gate or whatever the term was that was called. But in terms of the Minneapolis 2040 planning, I think we all rolled up our sleeves and, engaged in respectful dialogue around the tables throughout this city and came up with some recommendations that seemed to make sense. And the council stepped up and reiterated that, yes, indeed, we as a city value the work of neighborhood organizations throughout our sectors of the city and our communities. And so I think that was appreciated by residents and neighborhoods. And I hope that the flexibility and agility of our body of this commission was demonstrated once again. So I just want to conclude my segment and say that the NCC continues to meet the directives of the City Council and Mayor in the amended and restated enabling resolution. And having gone over the key components of the annual report, which I believe all of you have as part of your report, I don't want to take too much time from Commissioner Mills, but please do take an opportunity to look at that, because the subcommittees of the NCC, including the Crime and Safety Task Force, that issued a crime and safety guide that I think you'll find very interesting and useful. Such diverse things as lighting or straw bale gardening, community safety patrols, police purchasing additional bike patrol police resources, or looking at the initiatives that came before the NCC, the report on the 20-year street funding and how the equity components that have been designed into that process. Proud to say, as a Northside resident, that we had the Patrick Henry High School Robotics program talk about its program and how it is reaching out to school kids, children of color and girls, to get them involved in science, technology, for better careers in the future, as well as the Oromo community assessment that was done. But I'd like to, at this time, thank you for the opportunity and ask if Commissioner Marcus Mills will use the balance of our time to talk about the sector meetings for Neighborhoods 2020.
Sure, maybe as he comes up here, I could just ask you, is the guide available then to residents and neighborhood organizations? Is there a link? Is it online? How would we access the
Crime
public
and Safety Guide? Yes, Commissioner Gordon, that is, or Councilmember Gordon, that is available online. And it was distributed when that report was finalized. And I think I may have been remiss did I not say that I'm Jeff Strand. I'm a council appointee and I live in Shingle Creek in Ward 4.
You didn't mention Shingle Creek. Excellent.
Hello all, I'm Marcus Mills, Commissioner from the 4th District for the NCEC. I live in the Marcy Homes neighborhood, and y'all have run across me a few times before. Today I'm handling basically a subcommittee report, partly Commissioner Strand helped with a good deal of this. Most of the information has been touched on, and so I'll get into a little bit of the nitty-gritty. Of course, Commissioner Strand, former Chair Strand, put forth the Crime and Safety Task Force information. We produced the report that cataloged several practices, organizations, and demonstrated some successes in localities where they were implemented. So those concepts are in the document that you were just asking about online. Our City Department's Engagement Committee is producing reports outlining several best practices in city departments communicating with neighborhoods and vice versa, including discussions of cases when that diligence broke down a bit. The aforementioned Post-it Gate is actually one of our primary case studies in trying to figure out how to avoid some of those pitfalls. But the main event, what I'm primarily up here for, is discussing the Neighborhoods 2020 considerations, the things that we've accomplished with Neighborhoods 2020. So that process begins mostly with the art of hosting and harvesting conversations that matter. While the committee has thought through a number of strategies and possibilities on how to go about gaining good information on what neighborhoods were seeking out of what communities were seeking out of their neighborhood associations, neighborhood organizations, and what they sought from the NCEC and the city in regards to interface, communication, and kind of assistance in terms of both assisting with the programs that they're trying to accomplish and have accomplished, but also how to effectively do the work that the city and the communities actually see as the job of neighborhood associations. So that begins with the work with the art of hosting and harvesting conversations that matter, which is a training that we all went through, or that many of us went through, and many folks from the neighborhoods went through to help in engendering this process. And what that basically involves is many different techniques on how to communicate, how to draw out the information that you're actually trying to get, to get past kind of people's ordinary kind of small talk tendencies and work out the necessary information that will help in a larger process. Out of that communication, we came up with a World Cafe style of communication, way to gain that information from communities. And we also developed three questions that we would be asking our community members. These questions are: what services, opportunities, and information should neighborhood organizations provide? What are characteristics of an effective neighborhood organization, and how can neighborhood organizations empower engagement? Out of those three questions, we developed these sector meetings, the 5 sectors: north, the east side, which is northeast and southeast, downtown, south and southwest. We put together meetings in each of those areas, advertised them in both neighborhood associations, local papers. We had several neighborhood organizations actually assisting in the process and even hosting those meetings. And those sector meetings were attended, as Commissioner Strand has stated, by over 500 people. We got dozens and dozens and hundreds of responses of various levels, of various degrees of importance to the individuals who gave them. And we made sure to check the demographics to make sure that everyone was being represented. The demographics actually turned out relatively close to the city as a whole. in terms of the attendance at those meetings and responses. Also, we did, NCR put together a number of meetings with several communities that were slightly underrepresented and wanted to make sure that their concerns were involved in this process. And so all of those responses, the kind of number one responses to each question, were brought together and formulated into a report that denotes the themes raised by the question. That report is now under review. It is available online. Yeah, that report is has been submitted for review and public comment, and it is online at the moment, so you can get all of the details and the prospective answers that people gave on that report. So down to the raw data, and those are the primary aspects of the 2020 report as it stands. Are there any questions for me?
I don't see any questions right now.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Gordon, committee members. This concludes our report for today of the NCC Annual Report. So I will stand for questions.
Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to briefly thank the folks who are volunteering so much time and energy into this. And I have seen a really huge shift over the past several years. This work takes a lot of time and effort, and I think we're starting to see the results. That, there's still a lot more to do, and continue to expand our efforts to engage really truly into all of our communities. But I really think we're starting to see a big difference, and I really appreciate everything that's gone into that.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other questions. I know that the work as it comes forward to the committee has gotten questions in the past. I know that people are going to be really interested in the One Minneapolis Fund and how we're measuring and evaluating that success as it's going forward. And of course, the work that's been going on with the Neighborhoods 2020 is going to be really critical to future. I think the big decisions that we're going to have to make in the next couple of years about how we're going to keep maintaining the support for the department and also for the commission and neighborhood organizations. Those are really going to be big decisions. I guess I had one question. It was also kind of to say, I hope that there'll also be involvement in the comp planning process and watching that as it goes forward. Is there a formal way that the commission is connected right now to that?
Chair Gordon, committee members, actually through the City Department Engagement Committee, where the meeting in September will be meeting with CPED staff to talk about how what would further engagement with neighborhoods look like. I think my understanding with the comp plan is that its engagement got kind of put on hold or held up, but the NCEC and the NCR department will be heavily involved in helping guide some of that engagement work.
Well, good. I know they're constantly engaging, and I know a lot of that's coming through CPED. They were out at Open Streets, and so that's going on too.
Yep.
And I appreciate that. And then I had one other question, or this is something to put out there. I know that the commission for a while had a committee that was looking at how they could help evaluate city departments or maybe assist city departments in their own community engagement and involvement. There was even some discussion about some kind of report card or feedback loop, because as a council member, we often hear about great projects the city does and how that department and those staff really engage community members. And then we might rarely hear about another project where, hey, the community felt left out and this project went forward and they weren't engaged. Is NCEC still looking at that?
Chair Gordon, committee members, yes, although it's not really being considered a report card, the City Department Engagement Committee is looking at creating a guide for city departments that they can use in engaging and actually being available for assistance whenever there's an engagement component that could be considered.
Well, the name of that new committee did seem like that might fit underneath it, so that's great to hear. Appreciate that. All right, I don't see any other comments or questions, so thank you very much, everybody, for the presentations. And I'll move to receive and file that annual report. Seeing no questions on the motion, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, say no. That motion carries. Now we can move on to the second big chapter, I guess, of the committee meeting, where we're going to stop talking so much about engagement and talk about energy now. We have a pretty significant report where our inventory about our greenhouse gas emissions. And we're getting an update here because we finally have, I think, some data from 2015 that we can report on. So welcome, Mr. Hollenkamp.
Thank you very much. Chair Gordon, committee members, thank you for having me this afternoon. My name is Luke Hollenkamp. I'm in the City Coordinator's Office of Sustainability, and I'm going to present an update on our 2015 greenhouse gas emissions inventory. And as Chair Gordon mentioned, this is a little bit lagging. It takes a little bit of time to collect data. So this is for 2015 data, and we're currently collecting 2016 data, and we'll update you soon on that as well. To walk you through our greenhouse gas emissions inventory a little bit, I want to point out that there's really 5 key components of the inventory that we measure. First off, on this bar chart, you'll see electricity generation, which is in blue. And next is natural gas consumption. That's in the gray color there. In green, you see on-road transportation, think vehicles, buses, and that sort. And then you have yellow, solid waste. And then in kind of a reddish, very, very small color, you can't really see much of, is wastewater. And those are the 5 primary components that we currently track in our greenhouse gas emissions inventory. You'll see here that we track them back to 2006, and that is because 2006 is our baseline year for emissions inventories. All of our goals, which we as a city have set, always reference back to the 2006 inventory year. And in 2015, I have the pleasure of informing this committee that we did meet our reduction goal. The city had set a reduction goal of 15% below 2006 levels. We surpassed that goal at 17.8%. And you can see here what the reduction looks like. You'll also notice that there is a good amount of seasonal variation. Those ups and downs year over year are actually primarily due to the gray bars, which are the natural gas consumption bars. Those are very, very much tied to whether we have a warm winter or a cold winter. So although you do see a seasonal variation there, there is a downward trend when you look at the data. Looking then at the trends from 2014 to 2015, we see that wastewater emissions, unfortunately, were the one area that has gone up. And again, wastewater emissions are actually the lowest emissions, or rather the lowest component of emissions in our greenhouse gas inventory, but they did rise ever so slightly. However, the other 4 sectors did decrease. Again, that's electricity, natural gas, on-road transportation, and solid waste emissions. Another change that was made to the 2015 inventory is that the methodology changed in some very technical ways so that it now is compatible with our commitments to the Compact of Mayors. We now use a very specific protocol methodology called the Global Protocol for Community Scale Greenhouse Gas Emissions Inventories, GPC for short. That means that we are now able to compare our inventories on an apples-to-apples basis with other municipalities who also use the similar inventory. There will also likely be more updates in the coming years to this inventory. This is a evolving science, this accounting of greenhouse gas emissions, and every year there tends to be some updates to these inventories. So when we make those updates, as we did this last year, we don't just make an update to that year of data. We make an update all the way back to our 2006 baseline and the years between the current year and 2006. So again, we're also comparing apples to apples across all of our city years.
Can I just ask, do we think the wastewater emission increases just come from the growing population of the city?
It's largely a result of the growing population of the city, and most of those emissions come from the Metro wastewater plant down in just south south of St. Paul there. So mostly that is tied to the growing population of the city. You do see some seasonal variations there as well, or some yearly variations, but much less so than natural gas.
Thank you.
To zoom in a little bit more on the 2015 inventory, you can see a little bit better how those 5 sectors constitute our emissions. Electricity consumption is the largest contributor to our greenhouse gas emissions for 2015, and it has been that way since we began the inventory in 2006. However, this has been steadily decreasing year over year due to bringing more renewable resources online from Xcel Energy, as well as then consumers opting into programs such as Xcel Energy's Wind Source program, as well as then, in particular, the city, this is relevant to the city, Renewable Connect purchases for larger operations, as well as then for private individuals. That Renewable Connect program is coming online, so we expect to see some more, say, greening of our electricity consumption in years following. Natural gas consumption is the second largest component there. It also is worth noting that the emissions have increased in terms of natural gas as a component of our overall emissions inventory from 29% to 33% since 2006. This isn't necessarily because of increasing natural gas emissions by the community. This is more of recognizing that as electricity consumption becomes a smaller piece of the pie, the other pieces, such as natural gas, which has stayed relatively constant with some yearly variation based on weather, now becomes a larger component of our emissions. And also, same with on-road transportation there. It's increased from 21% of our emissions inventory to 26% of our emissions inventory. Again, when you look at our emissions year over year for transportation, there was a slight dip during the recession as fewer people were out on the road commuting to jobs, for instance. That has rebounded somewhat. But that is a sector that is going to require more and more attention by us as a city in the future. Obviously, mode shifting to public transit, to biking, to walking is very important, as well as electrification of of private and public vehicles as well.
Could you remind me how we measure on-road transportation greenhouse gas emissions? Because it's a little harder to nail down.
Yeah, that's a very difficult one to nail down, and that methodology is continuing to evolve as well. What we currently utilize is some computer models that MnDOT has created, where they basically are able to calculate the amount of miles that are driven by anyone driving on streets within the boundary of Minneapolis. So it's not just our residents, it's folks coming and going plus our residents. And it's an estimate. There's no way to definitively measure transportation emissions, but we will, I think, need to make some variations to the way we use that model in the future. For instance, as we as a city look for more electrification opportunities for vehicles, that may not necessarily show up in a statewide MnDOT model when they look at the vehicle fleet of the state, but that could potentially show up in the vehicle fleet for Minneapolis residents or for the city enterprise. So we'll need to come up with some, I think, creative but rigorous ways of measuring that changeover in years in the future.
Thank you for clarifying.
I also want to zoom in a little bit more, again, on the electricity emissions.
Councilmember Bender, I think, has a question about the last pie chart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick clarification. So is that to say that emissions from on-road transportation are actually increasing, or they're increasing as a percentage of the total, or both?
It's both. Primarily what you're seeing is they're increasing as a percentage of the total. However, there was that dip during the recession years, which has now come up to pre-recession levels. Zooming again in on electricity here, we see that electricity, which is shown in blue here, the emissions from electricity have been decreasing rather steadily year over year. And again, this is because of the graining of the electricity grid. What you then see in gray there is our natural gas emissions, which have remained relatively constant year over year. Now, it is notable that it hasn't increased, and part of that's because of conservation efforts, energy efficiency efforts, but it hasn't gone down like you've seen with electricity. And we're nearing a point, likely in the next few years, where natural gas emissions will now become the greatest sector in terms of emissions, greater than electricity. So that just shows the, I think, challenge we're up against and how important it is to be working with both our utility partners to address this type of situation that we're finding ourselves in. And I don't think we, many of us even in the environmental community, really saw this coming this fast. There's been significant progress in electricity generation, bringing in renewables. So we are coming to this crossover point here, and we'll have to find some new solutions to tackle that.
Currently, there really isn't any effort on the part of the natural gas company to look for alternatives for heating our buildings.
We've begun.
Is that true?
Yeah, sure. Chair Gordon, we've begun talking a little bit through the Clean Energy Partnership with CenterPoint Energy about what type of alternatives there may be. With Xcel Energy and our electricity system, we're able to look at both conservation of energy to decrease emissions as well as then renewable sources. Currently, right now, with our natural gas system, we only have conservation as a tool, and we'd like to be able to add a renewable component to that. We've begun very early conversations on what would renewable natural gas potentially look like. What is the technical feasibility of that? What is the possibilities of that? Where would it come from? Those are a lot of questions that are probably going to take quite some time to look at, but I think that's a really important discussion to start having.
Well, I could see how if we end up getting all of our electricity from solar or wind or those clean sources, there might be a motivation then to heat our homes using electricity as well.
Absolutely, and there's some
and run our cars as well.
Sure, Gordon, there's some interesting studies out right now too on for instance, cold weather heat pumps, air source heat pumps, and what they could contribute to heating of buildings using electricity as a source. But that's a emerging science. We're in a very difficult climate with how cold we can get to completely move away from natural gas. But I think that there's many opportunities again to look at those resources as well as to look at ways to do some heating with electric sources as well.
And I'm always interested in seeing when our natural gas company might get in the business of geothermal. Seems like they're excellent at digging holes and putting in pipes. So that's just a business plan idea.
And finally, I want to talk about, again, where we are and where we're going. We did achieve that 15% reduction by 2015. Again, that was an actual reduction of 17.8%, so we made good progress there. However, a lot of that was dependent, again, on greening of our electricity resources. 81% of that total reduction did come from electricity being a less carbon-intensive resource. Looking into the future, we have even greater goals to achieve. We have a 30% reduction by 2025 that the city has set forward, and then an 80% reduction by 2050. Those are very, very important, very much needed from a climate perspective goals, and very difficult to achieve. So it's going to require a lot of work and a lot of resources. But what that looks like when you look at our emissions inventory here again is that first dotted line is our 15% reduction, again, which we just hit. That second dotted line is our 30% reduction that we need to hit by 2025. And then that third line, way at the bottom there, that's our 80% reduction by 2050. And that's going to require a sizable effort for us to get there. It's also going to require some technological change and innovation in the years to come. And when you look at it too, we're not going to be able to achieve it by just taking a little bit off of each sector. We really need to tackle all sectors that you see here. For instance, that 80% target, even if we completely eliminate electricity, natural gas, wastewater and solid waste, if transportation continued to be what it is today, we still would not be able to meet that 80% reduction. So we need to look at all of our sectors combined.
But it looks like if we got 100% of our electricity from renewable sources, we could reach the 30%. Is that your guess?
That would be correct.
Okay.
And I'm now happy to take any questions that the committee has.
I don't see any other questions, and of course I jumped in along the way. So thank you very much. I think we'll receive and file the report though, and it gives us some good food for thought. You know, my big question would be, when are you going to have the master plan ready to get us to the 80%, and what are the next steps we have to take? But you don't have to go into that now because that's a bigger question. We do have our climate action plan with lots of ideas in there too. You can answer that if you want.
I can mention that, that our climate action plan does have a lot of great ideas. We were engaged a year or so back with a study with Siemens Corporation, and they laid out a footprint for us to achieve that 8% reduction. And ultimately, it's possible, and it requires basically adopting every policy and technology we can think of to get to that level. So it's kind of an all-hands-on-deck endeavor.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I really appreciate the report and all the effort on this. I think it highlights so much of the work being done and that still needs to be done. I think personally of myself as a homeowner and around this whole issue of kind of the rule of 80-20, that you spend 80% of the time working on 20% of the overall work. And I think about that with homeowners and trying to get them converted over. I know we spent at our house around $8,000 to upgrade our boiler to 95% efficiency. We spent 10 grand so far on new windows, probably have another 10 grand to go on that, another 5 grand to put into insulation throughout the house at least. And so it gets pretty pricey, and that's just one home out of 105,000 homes in the city. So I think that that's probably, if it's fair to say, a pretty substantial effort ahead on that front. So I would just look forward to any sort of recommendations or additional programs that we can offer residents in terms of helping them with this work, because it's really important stuff. And in a lot of ways too, it becomes even more difficult when I know our property tax assessment structure. When we make these home improvements, then our home value can go up and then we can pay more in taxes. And so it can be almost disincentive in some ways as well. So just throwing those out as some ideas and some feedback, and definitely looking forward to more there. It seems that there's a lot of folks that want to do the right thing, and it's a really big expense to get there on all fronts at home.
Well, I appreciate that. Appreciate the report. And I will then move to receive and file our 2015 greenhouse gas emissions inventory update. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. And that brings us to our last item, which is related, and it's our Clean Energy Partnership second annual report.
Hello again.
Hi.
Again, I'm Luke Hollenkamp at the City Coordinator's Office of Sustainability. Thanks for the opportunity today to present our annual report. I'm joined today by Bridget Doctor of Excel Energy and Al Swintek of Centerpoint Energy to help on the presentation of the report here. As you know, the City of Minneapolis, Excel Energy, and Centerpoint formed the Minneapolis Clean Energy Partnership back in January of 2015. And this represented a first-in-the-nation collaboration between a municipality and its utility providers. And the goals were to achieve the city's energy efficiency and renewable energy goals. The primary goals of the partnership itself are to increase energy efficiency in the city, increase renewable energy within the City of Minneapolis, and to develop a strong city utility collaboration. To accomplish these goals, the partnership undertakes a number of community and stakeholder engagement efforts. It collects and analyzes data and information, and it explores policy levers. The annual report itself captures the partnership's work and metrics from 2016. The report focuses on 8 agreed-upon metrics by the Clean Energy Partnership Board, with raw data in the report displayed at the top and also narratives accompanying that data. After almost all of those metrics are shown and displayed, there are included detailed census tract level maps, which display where the programs or participants are located within the city. The combination of these data sets and maps enables us to look in new ways at which varied communities are utilizing these programs the most, which are lacking, and will assist us in future efforts to ensure that these programs are distributed equitably. Having data compiled in one report and doing so over consecutive years, not just 1 year at a time, will ensure that we are able to better understand the complex interplay between these programs and the communities they serve. This year's report also introduces a new web-based reporting structure. Our previous reports were PDF printed reports. This year we've moved to an online web page report. This delivery method is going to be more accessible to users, increases usability, reduces printing, and is easier to update when necessary or when additional information becomes available for many of these metrics. Additionally, the programs and the resources that are referenced in this report can then be directly accessed by the reader via web links, and we hope this will increase the participation and awareness of these programs for our residents and businesses. And I have there a link to the report. We won't be going through the entirety of the report today, but it is a lot of great information to look through if you have the opportunity. I'm now happy to present a few high-level highlights of the annual report. As I just mentioned, the city achieved its greenhouse gas reduction goal for 2006, compared to 2006 of a 17.8% decrease. We also, in 2016, started as a partnership working more with some of our other city resources. One of those resources as a city, one of those great programs, is the Green Business Cost Share Program that began in piloted work and now has leveraged over $43,000 of funding for $400,000 energy efficiency work. And we're continuing to find new ways through many of our partnership conversations to bring the utilities to work closer with some of our internal programs within the city. Xcel Energy had $15.7 million in program investment in Minneapolis. These are your energy conservation, your energy efficiency programs. And this reached thousands of participants and ultimately resulted in $7.8 million in annual savings for customers. CenterPoint Energy, when you look at all of their program offerings combined, had $7 million in program investment, again, reaching tens of thousands of participants and annually reducing customer bills by $2.8 million. These are some of the high-level numbers that give you a sense of kind of the scale of some of the work that is done by each of the partners, as well as the scale of the potential collaboration that we hope to continue working to achieving. Our first metric, which I've already referenced, is our greenhouse gas emissions inventory. I won't spend any additional time on this, but this is the first metric, one of the very important metrics of the partnership. Metric 2 and 2.1 regard commercial buildings, which is, again, a very important sector of our electricity and our natural gas consumption. And all electricity consumption in 2016 was down 0.2% year over year. Natural gas consumption was down 6.2% year over year. One of the things that you do see there, again, is there is, with natural gas, a little bit more variation year over year due to weather conditions. But it is a positive sign to see both of those trending downward. When we look at the benchmarking data for our large commercial buildings, and we get a lot of this data through our commercial building benchmarking ordinance, we were able to analyze 417 properties. And this represents 70% of the city's total commercial area, a very sizable amount of our commercial property. The median Energy Star score for those buildings is 71. To give you a sense of what that means, Energy Star scores are given from a 1 to 100 scale. 50 is a median, and 75 would be considered Energy Star. So that's very good that we achieved a 71 in terms of median Energy Star score for our buildings. And we hope to increase that further in the future.
When do we get the 2016 data?
The 2016 data just recently had to be reported, so we'll begin analyzing that over the next few months, and likely sometime around the end of the year, we'll have a update on some of the metrics regarding that data in particular. And one of the trends we did see with this metric was that average building use intensity did decrease. We refer to that as EUI, so buildings became, on average, more energy efficient. But in fact, they increased when accounting for weather. So we're able to normalize the data and be able to recognize cold versus warm summers, cold versus warm winters. So we see a little bit of a discrepancy there. It was a slight increase when accounting for weather, but that's some of the noise sometimes that you see year over year, that then you want to be able to gather multiple years together and see how we are trending. And with our benchmarking program, we've just recently reached our fully phased in year. So now in subsequent years, we will be able to see that trend line in a clearer fashion. And for more information on the benchmarking data, we do have an annual report that we release on that is linked to here, which has a lot more great analysis included. And now I'll turn it over to Bridget Doctor to talk more about the commercial utility energy efficiency program.
Thank you, Luke.
Welcome. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, council members. Councilmember Johnson, for the record, I recommend doing the insulation before the windows. You'll get a lot better return on that. Just for the record. So slide 7 here has the metric of the commercial utility energy efficiency programs. And on the left, you have CenterPoint's data, and on the right, you have Excel's data. What the bars tell you on the top is the energy cost savings, and the energy cost savings from 2015 to 2016 increased by $4.45 million for a total of $10.35 million. And what that means is that the energy efficiency investments that our commercial customers made between the two utilities will save those customers $10.35 million over the lifetime of those measures. So very, very significant. Rebate dollars, so money back into the hands of those customers, increased 100% between 2015 and 2016, estimated at about $10 million. And energy savings didn't quite double, but it was very significant. One of the programs that we chose to focus on in the partnership was energy design assistance. And that's because it's the new building design program. The program itself had a significant jump in 2016, as you can see. This is a joint program between Xcel Energy and CenterPoint Energy. 154% increase in energy savings and 372% increase in therm savings with $2.4 million in customer rebates. One of the reasons why we have tried to put a focus on this is we're trying to find that tie of where the utilities and the city can really get in at the right niche of the developer and the city and the utility and find the right entry point, because we think we can actually get in earlier than we are. And then this is a map of both utilities and where those projects took place. The darker areas are where the projects were the heaviest, and then the lighter are obviously where they were the lightest. But there's a lot of overlap on these, which you would expect from the commercial sector. A lot of those developers and the commercial businesses are working with our account managers or our business call centers, or with the developers themselves having ties to our energy design assistance program. So they're working that electric and gas at the same time.
So when we say commercial, that excludes any residential buildings, or does that also include the larger?
This is commercial only.
Does it include office towers?
Yes, this would include
and
office
manufacturing
towers.
And any retail.
This would be 5+ in a multi-family, multi-unit setting.
Oh, so it would also
5+
include
units.
Residential apartment built larger?
Yes, for
okay.
the utilities, that's considered commercial property.
I thought so, and I just wanted to make sure, because clearly some of the areas that are dark green don't have very much commercial. Okay.
So residential building energy use. One of the things to note here is the CenterPoint and the Xcel Energy bar charts is that, as Luke pointed out, weather plays a big role on the gas side. There's decreasing usage on the natural gas side and some pretty levelized usage on the electric side. 2016 was a fairly warm year. So the natural gas side, there was some continuing decrease. On the electric side, we had another 3,800 residential customers come into the city, and a lot of that was due to new construction. We all know there's a lot of construction going on in the city, and that's wonderful. We had a couple of programs I just wanted to note. Xcel Energy started a smart thermostat program this year where you can pretty much dial in anything. You can do it wireless through your phone, set your AC, set your furnace, and 676 participants for a new program within the city is pretty good. CenterPoint Energy's residential heating program had almost 2,000 participants, saving nearly 330,000 therms. And then on the renewable energy side, the left side is Xcel Energy's wind source program. The right side is solar rewards. The wind source program, it's important to note that
For 2016, the participants grew, but you see the drop between 2014 and then 15-16. That's because we had a couple of large customers drop off the program. So the participants and energy is not necessarily tied. And then on the solar rewards program, this is the rooftop solar. There was a slight increase on this. We had actually just 3 more customers come on in 2016. The program's now at a little over a megawatt. Solar gardens are a much easier price point for a lot of customers. So I don't see that this program's really going to jump off and kind of go gangbusters in the next few years. And then solar gardens, where the first solar gardens come online in 2016 with for Minneapolis customers, and Minneapolis customers that can sign up for solar gardens would be gardens that are within their county or an adjacent county. 3 megawatts, 5 gardens, and then 95 customers had bill credits by the end of 16. And then as of last Friday, when we filed our status report with the PUC, we had 116 megawatts, 35 projects online, and approximately 2,200 subscribers. So the program is coming around. And then metric 5, the home energy squad, you'll see a decrease in participation between 2015 and 2016. It's actually about a 30% decrease. A large part of this comes from 293 visits that were completed in 4 large apartment buildings in 2015. These buildings would have now gone through the Utilities Joint Multifamily Building Efficiency Program, but that was not around in 2015. If you take out those buildings, there's about an 8% difference. And there's going to be some ebb and flow from particular programs, and the program itself is down a little bit right now. The Clean Energy Partnership, where that's one of the things that we're looking at, is this was chosen to be a focus program because it was a joint utility program, but is this really the one of the focuses that we want to do, and is this the answer for it? So we're looking into that right now. Overall, approximately 10% of the 1 to 4 unit residences have participated in Home Energy Squad between 2009 and 16. And the average participant of Home Energy Squad saves nearly 10% of their Minnesota household energy use. 32 residents received zero interest loans for air sealing and insulation upgrades through the city's and CEE's loan offering. And in 2015 and 2016, CenterPoint Energy partnered with CEE to provide additional residential energy engagement services to Home Energy Squad visits in Minneapolis to encourage participants to move forward and make those air sealing and insulation upgrades to their homes. The pilot was successful, resulting in a 10 percentage point increase in the number of customers moving forward versus those who didn't go through the pilot. And due to this success, CenterPoint Energy expanded the pilot into a permanent part of Home Energy Squad in 2017. And with that, I will turn it over to Al Swintek.
Good afternoon, Chair Gordon and committee members. Al Swintek with CenterPoint Energy. So my role today is to talk about the final 3 metrics, which are low-income services, air sealing and insulation, and then the multifamily program participation with regard to conservation improvement programs. So I'll start with our conservation improvement program information. The programs are designed specifically to help low-income individuals improve the energy efficiency of their residents, and obviously save both energy and lower their energy utility bills. It's important to know that they're available to both homeowners and renters. Now, there are numerous existing conservation program offerings, including weatherization, appliance replacements, lighting upgrades, mechanical system replacements, water heaters, furnaces, and the like. There are also federal weatherization assistant program dollars that are sometimes available, and the utilities conservation improvement programs, the low income programs are can help leverage those federal dollars, which can be very helpful. So that's the energy conservation side. There are also several programs designed to help low-income customers with their energy bills. And just to tick off a few of them, XL has a couple significant programs, one called Power On, another one is focused on seniors, low-income seniors, to help them. We'll get into some numbers in a little bit here. And then CenterPoint Energy also has what's called a gas affordability program to help customers buy down their energy bills. In addition to the utility programs, there's also, of course, low-income home energy assistance, LIHEAP dollars that come from the feds. And then the Salvation Army also has a program called Heat Share, which is monies that are donated by individuals that then go to help customers in need. So to get into some of the numbers here, the increased participation with regard to the low-income participants on the energy efficiency side, the increased participation due in this area to low-income residents living in multifamily buildings who were able to participate in the multifamily building efficiency program. So there were more programs designed to target individuals primarily living in low-income buildings. And in fact, XL over doubled the participation rate in a program called the Multifamily Energy Savings Program, going from 661 folks that were helped in 2015 to over 1,300. Spending was up. So increased spending targeted at low-income folks. Now, these are all combined numbers, but increased spending, combined meaning XL and CenterPoint, was due to deeper retrofits in single-family homes being done when opportunities presented themselves. We also, CenterPoint Energy, also received authorization to adjust our low-income weatherization program to provide standalone upgrades such as furnace replacements, water heaters, things like that, in situations where the federal weatherization assistant program, they have a ratio called the savings investment ratio. If that ratio isn't large enough, we weren't previously able to support those programs. We were able to change the way we were able to get authorization to now, even if the buildings didn't meet the weatherization assistant program ratio, we are still now able to contribute SIP dollars to help those customers that are living in those buildings. So in the past, we wouldn't be allowed to do that kind of work. We're also spending more per customer in those situations because sometimes there are health and safety related issues, such as we might need to upgrade the wiring in a home or put in a bathroom fan or some things like that that don't really necessarily lead to energy savings, but they're necessary as part of the upgrades that are being done. And if the federal money isn't available, that money needs to come from somewhere because the work needs to be done, and it comes from those conservation improvement program dollars from the utility. So There was also a bit of, so we've spent more, we've got more people that are participating, but the energy savings look like they're kind of decreased a little bit. So why is that? So on Excel side, the savings actually increased slightly. On CenterPoint side, it went down a fair amount. The reason for that, as we can tell, as we're kind of crunching through the numbers, is sort of it's a shifting of the way we're doing multifamily projects and how we're accounting for multifamily projects. In the past, if a building needed to have a boiler tune-up or a new furnace or something like that, it was really more of an individual kind of thing, where now with the multi-family building efficiency program, it's more of a holistic approach, which means that it's not just kind of a onesie-twosie thing. We're looking at it more comprehensively, but as a result of that, it takes more time to kind of do the work, and also the accounting ends up getting shifted kind of into a different bucket, as I'm understanding how the accounting of that works. So the savings are there, but it's just not showing up in this particular low-income bucket as I'm understanding it. Bill pay assistance, I'd mentioned Excel's Power On program. Over 2,300 customers impacted by that program in a positive way. Almost $2 million, $1.9 million of energy assistance. The senior assistant the senior discount program, 5,700 customers, over $1 million. That's an Excel program, and in our case, the gas affordability program, 3,450 customers, $1.2 million. There's a lot of programs available to help customers in need offset the cost of their utility bills. And you can see in both cases, participation rates up and spending is up. And as one might expect, the assistance is going in areas that perhaps might be of greatest need. And the one thing that also should be noted on this is there's a little different scale between the Excel and the CenterPoint maps. The reason for that is a lot of times a building might have multiple electric meters, but only one boiler, one gas meter. And so in order to sort of do a better job clearly showing where the resources are going as it relates to the rest of the city, we needed to have different scales on the maps. Switching to air sealing and installation, older homes offer an incredible opportunity with regard to energy conservation. A lot of times there's very little, sometimes even no insulation in the walls, very little in the attics. And the air sealing and insulation activities they're expensive, but they're not horribly expensive. So they normally give you a pretty good return on the investment. So that is possible, or positive, I should say. Bridget also mentioned the fact that we piloted the program in Minneapolis, which is really one of the goals of the Clean Energy Partnership, was, are there things that we can do to kind of experiment? We experimented in Minneapolis, ran a pilot program. It was super successful, over a 10% upgrade, and now we've rolled that program out throughout our entire service territory. So we feel very good about that. You can see the numbers, and a pretty good geographic coverage with regard to people taking advantage of that air sealing and insulation program. Lastly, I wanted to talk a little bit about the multifamily efforts that are being made through the Clean Energy Partnership. Multifamily is a real tough nut to crack. A lot of times there's a split incentive with regard to someone owns the building, someone else is paying the bill. It just gets to be very difficult. Even so, all of the programs that we have available are available for building owners to take advantage of in terms of rebates and engineering assistance, et cetera, et cetera. The one program that we're super excited about is the multifamily building efficiency program. I talked a little bit about that earlier. For market rate housing, multifamily housing, there can be rebates up to 40% of the cost of an upgrade. So you spend $10,000, you literally get $4,000 back. If it's a low income qualified home, those rebates will double. So literally you spend $10,000 on an upgrade, you can get up to $8,000 back. The trick is we still need to, of course, convince people to come up with the $2,000. I think we've seen some good success. Participants, 709 participants. Some of those are individual units, some of them are whole buildings. Close to $2 million of rebates targeted at this very difficult market segment. You can see the cost savings and the amount of energy saved. I think we can all be high-fiving ourselves saying this is great. It is great, but we also know that this is a difficult market and there is more work that needs to be done. Again, that's part of the Clean Energy Partnership's role, trying to figure out exactly how can we work together to encourage building owners to upgrade their buildings as much as possible, even if they don't pay the rents, even if somebody else is paying the rent. And I think that concludes my slides. Oops. Thank you very much.
Today we tried to give you a high-level overview of a lot of the projects and metrics that we have been tracking. There's a lot of numbers we didn't get into, but there are a lot of numbers contained within the annual report, which I think provides a lot of great data for us as folks that are working at the partnership. I think it's great data for policymakers as well as the community to look at. And that data can now be cross-referenced with some demographic maps. For instance, we've now in the annual report put a link to some newly created interactive maps the city has. They're called the Minneapolis Population Characteristics and Environmental Indicators maps. This is largely based off of the work that Kelly Millman and others did on the Green Zones initiative, trying to look for environmental disparities as well as other socioeconomic disparities within the city. So we've linked to that because that's going to be a great resource for us to then cross-reference with some of the maps you saw from the utilities, where we can see where program participation is happening and where it isn't happening. So as we as a partnership mature, that's going to be, I think, a very important thing for us to focus on as well. And with that, I think we'll stand and take any questions that the committee has.
I don't see any questions from committee members. I really appreciate the report. I think it's good that we keep evaluating the partnership and see how well it's doing and where it's going. It looks like we've got some good news to report. So I appreciate that. And probably next year is the time we can start digging into more about evaluating how it's going in a general scheme of things, what to improve. But really appreciate you all being here. I'm going to move to receive and file this. Seeing no other questions. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. All right, we've received and filed that, and I believe we concluded our business for the day. So this meeting is adjourned.